Welcome back to God, no, it's the wrong show.
Sunset City.
Welcome back to Sunset City, a Sonic podcast for the classic and the modern age. I need to develop an actual intro for this show. Hey, welcome to Ram on the Rocks. We're back here for episode 3. I am joined today by a friend of the channel for a while now, actually. Brendan, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Yes, hello. My name is Brendan Hesse. I do a lot of things in the gaming world. I have a channel called The Crawl on YouTube, and I'm also an editor at GameSpot and have written for a lot of other places, done a lot of other stuff. I've made a couple small indie games. Basically, I'm a jack of all trades that you probably haven't heard of, but I'm very excited to be here.
And this is fun. I just found out I've been saying your last name wrong in every video where I've shouted you out on the Patreon.
Oh my goodness, it's true, but you know what? It's happened since I was like, I don't know, since I can remember, because of the author Herman Hesse. So like every teacher I've ever had would call me Hesse, and a lot of people just would, and it's just something I don't even notice.
You know what's really funny about that too is like, because I watch a lot of K-Bash's stuff. And and he'll shout your name out too, but he'll say Hesse, and I'm just like, I think he's saying that name wrong.
he reached out, and he was like, hey, how do I say your last name? And I told him, and he was like, oh, and I don't know if it was like, because he and I are like, you know, we're friends, we talk fairly regularly, outside of just, you know, like Discord and whatnot, or I guess on Discord, but. Anyway, the point is, he was like, oh, but he never. I don't think I think he was probably defaulting to your pronunciation. So, I think it took him by surprise as well.
That's funny. Yeah, I'm not like super familiar with K-Bash. Like we're mutuals. I've definitely been watching a lot of his stuff. I don't know how familiar he is with me though. But he seems like a really nice guy.
He's super sweet. Yeah, I like K-Bash. It's funny because it's like there's this weird like network of people who I don't know how it happened, but like we all know each other, and I know it's just kind of like once you hit a certain threshold in like YouTube and social media, you kind of just start following a lot of the same people. Yeah. But it's really weird how it was like within the span of a year, all of a sudden, I started, I got to know you, I got to know K-Bash and a few other people, and then I would go to like Portland Retro, and I'd see like Nick, the game apologist, and I'd be like, oh, that's Wayne's friend, and then I'd see like Connor and other people, and it just was like, oh wow, because like one of my closest friends is Xeon from Nintendo Life, because we were both in the games media and we lived very close to each other, and we didn't know a lot of people. There isn't that many people in like the Portland, Oregon area that are in games media, so we would go to stuff together and be like, oh wow, like he knows everybody, and now I know so many people. And this is a total tangent. I'm sorry. What were we talking about before?
No, you're good. It is funny. The fact that Nick got to meet you in person before I did is insulting to me. So, you know.
Yeah, it was. It was funny because he was at, I think, Portland Retro was the first time, and then the first time I really chatted with him more than that was at PAX. And I think one of the first conversations I had was like, hey, I was like, hey, I know Wayne, or something like that. And he and Gilly were standing together, and they looked at each other. And I might have told you this story, but they looked at each other and they were like, Wayne's not going to believe this.
Yeah.
I was like, what do you mean?
I think part of what stemmed from that was because we were at MagFest together a little while before. And it was funny because they were constantly getting stopped by people that recognized them. I wasn't for
sure. Yeah.
I think the same thing happened at like Too Many Games, and it was just like, although I did get confused for Scott the Woz a couple of times. So
did you really?
Oh, like legitimately, especially since like that particular year, everybody was still wearing face masks. So like imagine like that on top of it. It was funny at first, and then it kept happening. I was just like, all right, a little tired of this.
You know, it's so interesting because like I get it. Like, you know, a white guy with glasses, I kind of get it. But also, like, I guess it's because I only know of Scott through his channel. I've never met Scott before. And just your personalities and your vibes and things you're interested in. I mean, there's some crossover, but they're so different. So, like,
yeah,
I don't know.
like
it's
like I'm an RPG guy. He's not.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I'm also taller. I'm taller than him.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, I've shaken hands with the man. As one, I think it was that same year at TMG actually. Got a picture with him and everything. It was basically like, buddy, like people have been confusing me with you for years. And he said,
yeah, someone just took the RPG part of his brain out, and you spawned out of it, and then it's like you were separated at birth, twins separated at birth, I guess. And one is the RPG guy, and one isn't.
Well, hey, he's a fellow Gravity Rush appreciator, so we have that in common.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. So cool. I don't have a lot of experience with the whole hosting thing just yet. I'm sure you could tell. Don't worry. I was basically just thinking, because I wanted to grab some other like friends in the YouTube space out onto here to the podcast. I was a little strapped for like what exactly I wanted to talk about last month, and so I just kind of defaulted to Nick, because I was like, well, you know, on a dime, I can count on Nick and I just being able to bounce off of each other. But again, it was just because like you and I have interacted a lot over the years. Yeah, you've been following the channel, I've been following your channel, so we've kind of like I don't. How long has it been? Like, when did you even first find the channel?
So I remember I think it was after your second Metroid month year. So I had found the channel just before you started Metroid month, the second one. And I like, it was like in September, I marathoned the first 4. And then Metroid month 2 happened, and it was then, I was like, all right, I definitely need to like subscribe to the Patreon. This guy is awesome. But it was your Zelda 2 video where I went, there's no question, like a fellow Zelda 2 liker. And you were saying, we were talking a little bit before the show started, that you did your Digimon World 1 review like almost 3 years ago, right?
I want to see if I can find the actual date real quick. Okay, so closer to 2 years ago. It was a little over 2 years ago.
That feels more correct in my mental timeline, because I was like, dang, dude, I didn't realize that. But
yeah, it was September of 2022 that video went up.
Okay, so I think it was probably like, gosh, was your first Metroid month in 2019 or 2020?
Ooh, Metroid month, I want to say I started that in 2020.
Okay. So it must have been 2021 that I discovered the channel.
Yeah.
So we're talking like, we're pushing almost into like 4 years now.
Yeah.
That I've been following. Yeah.
October 4th, 2020 was my first Metroid video.
Okay. Yeah. See, that's perfect. So yeah, that was basically also right around where I was kind of, I'd had a channel before, the channel up before that, and I was doing very like, you know, reactive, like, hey, this news happened, and my thoughts on the PS5 reveal and that sort of thing. And I wasn't really feeling that sort of content. Like, it was kind of what I was defaulting to, because I was watching stuff that was similar to that. And then I took a break from it, came back, rebranded, and I had been putting some stuff out, and that was, and so I'd really been like diving into like channels that I'd never heard before, and just seeking out people who were doing stuff that was a little bit more interesting than what I had normally been watching on YouTube. And from there, like, I think yours was one of the first channels that I discovered. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's cool, because I remember like I think it was around the time that like you found the channel. I was kind of poking around, and obviously I was always curious about like the kind of people that would actually like swing in and like not only just stop by, like watch the channel and like maybe watch a video or two, but like stick around after that. And that was always super exciting to me. So I was always just curious about the people that were actually doing that. And then I watched your video on like creating your own dungeon crawler.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think that was the first thing I saw of yours, though.
I think I know we first started interacting because we followed each other on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I think I followed you, and I was like, oh, he probably will recognize my name from the Patreon, which I assume is probably what happened. And then, yeah, from there, it was just like, that was where we first really started chatting. And then Discord, and as that all, kind of just snowballed. And then eventually, because of Metroid Month, I was so inspired by that. I made an entire Metroid documentary because that was like the primary inspiration behind that video. And then you were in it. You were one of the people featured in there, and that was really cool.
Yeah, it was honestly really exciting to be a part of that. One of the things that I had always wanted, especially with YouTube, was to kind of be part of. It sounds weird to say. I kind of wanted to be part of the club when it came to like YouTubers talking about Metroid, and
okay, yeah.
A lot of that it started with Some Call Me Johnny was like how I first started getting really interested in a lot of that, and what really inspired me in like wanting to actually make my own videos. And I found his channel through Metroid, and but like I never could have imagined that it would turn into is just like, hey, getting invited to be like part of like larger documentaries about it, or helping with a Did You Know gaming video about it, or hosting a panel about Metroid at MagFest, stuff like that.
Yeah, dude. So I have a question about the Did You Know gaming thing.
Okay.
Did they reach out to you directly?
So yeah, kind of actually. Yes and no. So what had happened was, 2020, the Metroid video went up, or my first Metroid month started, and in my while researching for Metroid 2, I discovered the book. I had never heard of Zebus Invasion Order before then, and I was fascinated by it because I had never heard anyone bring it up before. So I thought, well, this would be a fun thing to kind of like bring up. And then I made a little joke in there where I was just like, hey, Did You Know Gaming, consider this my audition tape. Haha. And like had a little bit of text that said, please notice me.
Yeah.
And it was like, that was quiet for like a year. 2021, I'm starting to get a couple of ideas down for what to do for Metroid Month, but I was working on other stuff at the time. It was like probably closer to like June, give or take. But it was around that Nintendo Direct when they announced Metroid Dread.
Okay, yeah.
And then Dr. Lava from Did You Know Gaming, I guess noticed the joke in the video because he was just kind of binging a bunch of Metroid content around the time. So he messaged me on Twitter and it's just like, I noticed. Did you actually want to do that? And I was like, so I guess he enjoyed the video well enough and was, I guess, confident enough that like, primarily it was just asking, hey, would you like to help with writing this? It's just like you did a little bit of research on this, so you brought this up, and there'd be an opportunity for you to help write about a video about it for Did You Know Gaming, especially since we want to do some stuff in October when Dread comes out. And I said, yeah, and I asked, I was just like, would it be asking too much if I could voice over the video too? And he was just like, I'll double check with, it's not my call, but he double checked with his people, and he was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, cool.
That's so awesome, dude.
So
that's so cool.
Yeah, it was and it's fun too, because like we've talked a little bit after that. This guy really wants me to talk about Resident Evil on the channel, and I promised him it would happen. I picked up a copy of the Sega Saturn port of the first Resident Evil earlier this year, because I was just like, when I do get to these games, I want to talk about the ports that like people don't talk about as frequently, and because I'm a big Sega head, like I want to talk about the weird Sega ports of those.
That's awesome. That's such a perfect angle too. It's funny because I didn't grow up with either a PlayStation or a Sega Saturn. So in the last like decade or so, I've been finally playing like PlayStation 1 games, but the last like 3 or 4 years has been like my Sega Saturn discovery. So just hearing Sega Saturn port is like an activation word. Like I'm like, yes, that sounds amazing. Do it. That sounds like a perfect video.
It's yeah, I think that'd be a lot of fun, especially since there is like some exclusive stuff in the Saturn port that doesn't get a lot of attention. Like the Saturn port had some content that essentially laid the groundwork for what would become Mercenaries later.
Oh, really?
Yeah, dude, it's wild. Like there's a variant on the Tyrant. There's some really cool stuff in the Saturn port. It's why I want to talk about like that version specifically when I do get around to talking about it. But
okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds really rad. I mean, I love Mercenaries mode. Another thing that I've recently gotten into is Resident Evil, and discovering Mercenaries mode. At first, it was through the 4 remake, but then like checking it out in other versions of it. It's such a cool idea for Resident Evil, so I'm very interested to see what that looks like in the Saturn version, even if it's just like the proto version of it, you know?
Yeah, and it's not like one-to-one like what that mode would later become, but it's just kind of like you could kind of see where the seeds were being planted. It's interesting. It's also cool because like earlier this year, or I think it was like late last year was when I started, and then like it carried over into early this year. I had played like a bunch of the later Resident Evil games, like especially like 7 and 8, Revelations, you know, stuff like that. Did not have experience with the originals, and so last year was like my first time playing. It was the HD port.
Okay.
Of the first Resident Evil, but
yeah, did you stream that?
I did.
I think I watched you stream that. That makes a lot of sense.
I think it was like right after I finished my initial playthrough of the game. I was just like, I want to play this again. Like I just want to play this again now, and so I went ahead and just immediately started streaming it, and I discovered that is probably one of the best games that I have ever played. It is so good.
Ah, man, see, I have it on my PS5, and I played like, it was after the 4 remake, I went on a tear, and I played 7, I played the 2 remake, and then I was going to go back to the older ones, and everyone was telling me like play the HD one. And I played, like I said, like an hour of it, and then something else came out. I can't remember what it was, and I never picked it up again. But everyone says that, and so I should really go back to it.
It is one of those where it took me a little bit of time, and it's one of those where like once you know what you're doing, it's a pretty short game. Like that is a brisk little experience.
I mean, that's perfect sounding to me right now.
Yeah. I will say your first time around, give yourself some time, especially like in the early game, to just wander and just kind of learn the mansion. Like get familiar with the area, get familiar with where things are, like let yourself soak in that atmosphere and wander around, get lost, like try to figure your way out around things.
Okay.
Do you know what a Crimson Head is?
Yes.
Damn. Well, I was kind of hoping you didn't. Scared the hell out of me while I was playing the first time. My friend Cullen was here. I had like a base understanding of what they were, but I didn't know that they are faster. And
right.
It scared me the first time I encountered one of those. I like jumped and Cullen was laughing his head off.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't know what's coming, it'll take you off guard for sure, because you're so used to what the rest of the enemies are like.
Yeah, but I really did. It was just especially that second playthrough. When you're playing through it again, you've like come to that familiarity, and you're using it to your advantage, and you just feel like you've mastered everything even so early on.
Right, yeah.
It's such a rewarding experience. start with Jill. Do not start trying to play as Chris. Chris is hard mode. Like,
okay,
yeah. Play as Jill first, and then move on to Chris later. Chris is still worth playing through, but he is hard mode.
Is that just because of the weapons he starts with, or items he doesn't start with, maybe?
So he actually gets stronger weapons primarily, but he does not have the lockpick that Jill has.
Okay.
So there's a little bit that makes that a little bit more complicated, but he also has like half the inventory space.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize that. I think when I started my playthrough, I think I started as Chris, so that's good to know.
Mm-hmm. I would always recommend.
I might just restart. Yeah, I might just restart as Jill.
If it makes you feel any better, I did the same thing, and then like somebody told me, it was just like, no, like if you're trying to like get into this game and actually enjoy yourself, like your first playthrough should be as Jill.
Okay, or maybe, you know what? Maybe I did start as Jill, because I do remember now messaging my friend and talking about like the differences between Jill and Claire, between like 2 and the 2 remake and then HD. So maybe I did. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I'll probably restart it anyway, because I won't remember where I was or what puzzle I was in the middle of, and it was only like an hour or so in, so it's not that much time lost. But
yeah.
But your point about the mastery on the second playthrough, that feeling is what's got me to go back and play. Like after playing 4, I played I played through it twice and then did some of the mercenary stuff, and it gave me I guess the only way I can describe it as, it gave me the Metroid feeling of, oh, I'm gonna optimize my timing, my playthrough, know where to go, all that sort of that sort of or even Dark Souls to a certain extent has some of that vibe. And I don't know what it is about that loop of like, okay, I played this game in, it took me like 20 hours to beat it the first time, the second time it's 8 hours, and then it's 4, and then that loop is really compelling to me.
Oh yeah, for sure. No, like I when I was playing Resident Evil 1, the Metroid feeling definitely, like that came at a point, and I was just like, oh, I know how to do this.
Yeah, and honestly, it was funny because I liked Resident Evil 4 when I played it on the Wii, and that was the only Resident Evil I had ever played. And then the Onimusha HD port came out, and it was on sale for like $5 on the East Shop at one point a couple of years ago. And I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna try this out. I've heard people talk about it. It's samurai Resident Evil, and I fell in love with that game. I thought it was so cool. My first playthrough of it was like 5 hours, and then I did like another 2. And my friend Brogan, who he hosts a podcast called the Daydream Cast that I'm on every once in a while, and we were talking about it on there, and he was like, oh dude, just go play Resident Evil. If you liked Onimusha, you need to just go play Resident Evil. And ever since then, that was it. So I really popped off this week when they announced a new Onimusha at the Game Awards. But
I bet, yeah. I've not played Onimusha.
I think knowing that you like Metroid and Resident Evil, my mind went totally blank there. But also, there's almost a little bit of like a flavoring of a Souls-like. People will probably cringe at me saying that about this game, but I do get some of that there a little bit, just in the sword play. Yeah, and I think you would really appreciate it. Plus, like I said, it's like a 4 or 5 hour playthrough, maybe a little bit longer than that your first time around, and it's so worth it. Like that could be like a 1 or 2 stream session game. That would be a perfect choice.
I may need to check that out. That one's always interested me too, because I know that there are like HD ports of that. My understanding is that the soundtrack changed from the original, like between the original release and the update, and I think it was some sort of controversy with the composer of the original soundtrack. I don't know all the details on that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm totally unfamiliar. My experience with that series is I played it I played it a few times, and then I set it aside, and I haven't gone through the rest of the PS2 ones, or the tactics game. So there's still a lot that I don't know about that. So yeah, my familiarity is only with the HD version. It's entirely possible that the music's different, which makes me very curious to like go try the original version.
Yeah. I also could be misremembering something, but I think that's what I heard. I would also say another game like from the past year that like it finally clicked with me, and a lot of it was just kind of carrying over that feeling of progression and mastery from Metroid and Resident Evil. I've said this name so many times this year, but Bloodborne. That game is so good.
It's so good. Those were really fun streams to watch too. To see that, to see your appreciation for it, and like you're just watching you play through it. I think it was your second time, right? Or was it your first full time?
I think it was my second or third time.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that there were a couple of new areas I had not been to before, and those were my first time through that. But it's just like by the time I wrapped up streaming on that, I took out every boss in the game.
Yeah, dude, that's such a fun playthrough. That game it's still my favorite world that From has made. And I've been playing From Software games since the PS2 era, and even including all of those, nothing makes my brain feel the way that Bloodborne does, and specifically its lore. It's so good.
Yeah, dude, that game is something else, and it's the way that everything is laid out to you, and the way that you discover like everything in it and what happened there. It is fantastic. That is a masterwork as far as I'm concerned.
I agree. I mean, and I think it gets brought up a lot by other people, a lot of commentators and reviewers, YouTubers, but it really is often cited by people like Miyazaki and other people on the team that it was their favorite game to make and to work on. And I know that people take that to mean that maybe there will be a Bloodborne 2 or something in that realm, and I would love that. But I also just, from the context of validation of knowing that they appreciate it as much as a lot of the fans do, it makes a lot of sense, because I feel there's so much love for what they were making in that game, and just the art direction and the richness of that world. I don't think it shines through in the design, obviously, but I just don't think I've ever fully seen it recaptured as much as I really, really love Elden Ring, and I especially love the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. Nothing still has felt like Bloodborne.
Yeah, I am of kind of a similar mindset with Bloodborne. Oh God, okay, sorry, had to sneeze.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Kind of in a similar mindset with Bloodborne that I am with like another game that I've talked about a lot this year, Skies of Arcadia, where that is an incredibly special game to me. I don't know that I would want it's not that I don't want a sequel. It's that I'm not specifically pining for one for either Bloodborne or Skies of Arcadia. I just want those games to be more available.
I totally get what you mean. Yeah, like there is a certain joy in having a thing just be a singular experience. Not everything needs to be a sequel or a spin-off. And the idea of Bloodborne getting a sequel, while it's exciting, I think I would be more interested in From Software maybe returning to some of the thematic or like aesthetic elements, rather than we have to do Bloodborne again. Right. And so to that, in that regard, I totally get what you mean.
And I think a part of that for me is like, I don't want to get too deep into like Skies of Arcadia, because I don't know if you've played it.
So I haven't, and I have some questions I want to ask you about it, but I want to hear more about what your feelings are on it.
Yeah, well, I am. That's doing a big video on that next year. Like,
Oh, perfect. Okay, great.
Well, next year's the 25th anniversary of Skies of Arcadia. And
Really? Okay.
yeah, and I'm going to be doing a big review where I'm primarily focusing on the Dreamcast version, but I will be discussing the GameCube version as well. And so I'm going to do two full playthroughs of this game to run through. I
did play the GameCube version a little bit, but it was like a rental.
Okay, I've complained to a lot of other people about this. Have I complained to you about what the GameCube version did to the soundtrack?
No.
It's so much worse. Oh my god.
Is it really?
Is
it entirely different music, or is it just like a different sound font?
It is, so all the same compositions, all the same tracks. And I'm being over dramatic. Like the GameCube OST, you can still listen to, and it is still good because it's a fantastic OST. But when you're directly comparing it with like the much higher quality sound samples that were on the Dreamcast version, I will send you an example later, just kind of like back to back, like going from this sweeping orchestral like sound to these little MIDI compositions that just sound so much crunchier in comparison.
Okay.
Yeah. I love I still like I finally landed myself a GameCube copy of that game earlier this year, and I sat down and I was just like, well, I don't have time to play through this, so I'm just gonna I just want to go through the opening area. Okay, I just want to get to this part. Okay, I just want to get to this part. Like
most of a playthrough.
It's that game is for something that I have discovered a love for very recently, like within the past like several years. It has easily shot up to like top 3. Like it is in my top 3 favorite games of all time.
It is on. I have like, I don't really have a backlog, and in fact I kind of try to not have one simply because in a day, like whether through my Discord server or on social media or something, I will encounter 10 new games, usually dungeon crawlers that I'd never played before and I think look awesome, but I have to kind of step back and say, okay, I'm playing like 5 other things right now. I don't need to make a list and put any pressure on myself to try and play all this cool stuff. But that said, there is a very small list of games that I really want to get to. This year, it was the Dot Hack games. Actually, it was more like the last 18 months, it was the Dot Hack games. And Skies of Arcadia is also on that list. And the reason it's on that list is not just because of its reputation and the fact that so many people love it. It's because, and not just, also because like I played it a little bit as a kid, and I never really fully saw it all the way through. But it's made by, or it was, I believe, directed and or produced by Ryoko Kodama. And she is one of my personal all-time favorite video game developers because she directed Phantasy Star 4, which is one of my personal favorite RPGs ever. And I think it is my personal favorite 16-bit RPG. And I, like, even over like Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger and whatnot, I love Phantasy Star 4. I love Phantasy Star in general. Like, that is one of my absolute favorite franchises of all time. And so she had a lot of hands in that. And then she went on and she made Skies of Arcadia, and I've never played it, so I feel like I owe it to myself to experience another one of her works, because she's also made Seventh Dragon. It's a series of RPGs, and I've played a few of those, and I quite like them a lot. There is actually a lot of similarities between stuff like the first few Phantasy Star games in there that I really appreciate, and Skies of Arcadia being this, it's kind of a steampunk sort of vibe, right? Or it's like, I mean, I guess you could say sky punk, pirate punk or something.
Oh, yeah.
You know, sky pirates. I feel like you may have talked about this before. Maybe I've just mentioned it in the stream of stuff like Treasure Planet or any sort of like Sky Island sort of thing. It's such like just Sky Islands or even just archipelagos in general, like Wind Waker and Mega Man Legends. all of those things really speak to me still. Like it's something that I really loved as a child, and it's stuck with me into my adulthood. Like as much as I talk about dank, dark dungeon crawlers and whatnot, like aesthetically, the Sega Blue is number one, and especially the 2000s era. So anyway, that is I know that it was a long-winded explanation as to why I want to play this game, but man, I really want to play this game.
Well, brother, I brought you on to talk. So.
I know. Yeah. I know. It's just like, oh, there. If at the very least, it should be clear that I really want to play this game.
It is, yeah, and it is like, I will say in terms of like RPGs, it's not the longest one you'll ever play. I think honestly, casual playthrough like 50, 60 hours. There is a little bit more to do in the GameCube version. I would still recommend the GameCube version. Like if you're trying to go,
counter rate go down a little bit too in the GameCube version? That's what I've heard.
Okay, people say that.
Not true.
I don't want to say it's not true, but when I review them, I'm going to be doing some really interesting note-taking through certain areas because I am not convinced that it is true to a meaningful degree. Okay. Yeah, I'm just getting like just bombarded like out in the sky.
Okay, that's good to know because I don't mind high encounter rates. Another one of my favorite RPGs of the 16-bit era is Seventh Saga, which has a very high encounter rate.
Yeah.
So that doesn't bother me too much. But I know that people often recommend the GameCube version, and that's one of the reasons they cite. But hearing that maybe it's not as much of a difference, it does make me interested in the Dreamcast version. Plus, the Dreamcast, I don't know, I mentally feel that the GameCube is the spiritual successor of the Dreamcast in a lot of ways. I know Sega was multi-platform at that point with a lot of different, with Sony and Xbox as well. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, the GameCube and the Dreamcast feel like siblings to me in a really weird way, and I think that those are two of the coolest systems ever made, and I think the Dreamcast is the coolest system ever made, and yeah, I think I might want to play it on there.
It's interesting you say that because I was actually equated that with the original Xbox.
Yeah, I think both are true. I think that the original Xbox is, in some ways, maybe even in an objective sense, like if you ran the numbers, it might actually be that the original Xbox is the true spiritual successor. But I feel like it's because of the games that I was playing on the GameCube were so similar at the time to a Dreamcast, and the Dreamcast games that I like, Phantasy Star Online is a huge favorite of mine, and I first played it on GameCube, and so a lot of that stuff feels, in my mind, in my my life experience, it feels more like a GameCube thing, but it's still like the Saturn and the Dreamcast, as I have come to find out, as someone who did not grow up with these systems, are two of the coolest video game systems ever made, and I'm so glad that like I can re-experience them, but I'm also deeply disappointed at how hard it is to get some of these games. Even just up and running on like an emulator, if you go that route, it's hard.
Yeah, it's like Saturn, I think, is a little more difficult to. Actually, I think the most difficult emulator I've ever had to set up was like the Sega CD, because I really wanted to play Snatcher.
Yeah, okay.
Lord knows I'm not getting a physical copy of that game, so.
I mean, to the credit of the people out there working on stuff, I think Saturn and Dreamcast emulation, Saturn emulation has come a long way. And Dreamcast has been there for a while, but Saturn emulation has come a long way. I've played several games via software emulation, and they've worked pretty great. Like I don't have like I played Panzer Dragoon Saga a few years ago for the first time. Because otherwise, how would you not? Otherwise, you can't just spend $8,000 or whatever it is for a copy of that game. But and it worked great. The emulator was fine. It's just it seems like the scene isn't as active as, say, a Nintendo or like a Nintendo 64 or a GameCube emulation scene. So finding stuff, getting it set up, it does take more effort.
Yeah, it is interesting though, like where the Dreamcast is concerned. I don't know if you ever make your way over to MagFest.
I don't, but that is so. Xeon recently moved back to the Midwest area, and he and I were talking about potentially doing MagFest next year.
Okay, cool. Yeah, shame you won't be there this coming one because I will be hosting a panel again. So that'll be fun.
Oh no, I'm sorry, that's the one I mean, the 2025.
Oh hell yeah! Okay.
Yeah. So we'll see. It's either going to be that or PAX East, one of the two. We haven't decided, but yeah.
Yeah. I was just gonna say though, one of my favorite things at MagFest, I've got some friends that get kind of bored in there. I don't know, maybe it's my like ADHD or whatever, if I even have that, just going wild while I'm in there. But like, there's just so many shiny objects to get distracted by. There's this one booth in there that's there every year where they sell like custom-made Dreamcast games.
Oh really? Oh, see, that's so the homebrew type stuff?
I need to get in contact with, and I think I tried, but I don't think I had any luck, but John from Good Vibes.
Oh yeah. I chat with him semi-regularly. I could try and like get you in touch.
I need to know where he got that Dreamcast copy of Cave Story.
Okay, yeah.
I need to know where he got that, because I need that, because that's two of my favorite things in the world, is Cave Story and the Dreamcast, and I need them together.
I'll write this down. I'll see if I can get in contact with him.
Oh my god, since we're already talking Dreamcast and John, like, he helped put together a wonderful video for Good Vibes Gaming. I think it was this past year. Some stuff that I'm definitely gonna have to take to heart and kind of put into practice, just kind of showcasing what you could still do with the Dreamcast and how to like get it online, and like how to like actually hook up a Dreamcast to modern Wi-Fi, play stuff like Phantasy Star Online, access like the downloadable content for Sonic Adventure, stuff like that. Fantastic video, highly recommend. You know what? I'm gonna link Brendan in the description if you're watching this on YouTube later. But I will link that video as well, just because it's like, God, it's funny. This is not. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's the kind of stuff that like. That gets me really excited about games in ways that, like, I don't want to talk too much about, like, the state of gaming, because I think games are better than they ever have been in a lot of ways. But also, you know, as we said earlier, you know, once you kind of cross the 30 threshold, like, you know, you start being like, I really wish that games were more like when I was a kid. And so seeing that stuff like that still exists, and or like FPGA emulation, that stuff is so exciting, and it's just it's such a cool realm of gaming. So I really, you should check that video out. That's very cool. I think you can even get on like Quake 3 and play that through network online network play, and that's so cool. That's
like I think, like you were saying, being able to go back to that specific era, and I don't know if it's all nostalgia. That is obviously a part of it. It's just kind of like, hey, this was like, you know, the era that we grew up in, and there's like certain things about this that we really appreciate. I do legitimately think though, especially like around the early 2000s, like there was something really special happening with the game industry that did kind of get lost. It's not to say that great things haven't happened since then, but there is like an aspect of it that just never quite hit the same. And especially for that like late era arcade scene.
Right. Yeah, where it was like they were really hitting like the apex of what they could do there, and there was there was parity with like home consoles in a lot of ways, but things were getting like basically, I mean, in a word, Sega, you know, like what Sega was doing so much weird, cool stuff. Yeah, and dude. That really, I mean, so was everyone, right? But it was just before a lot of genre staples were codified in stuff because of stuff like Halo and third-person action games. Like everything was still very different. Every game was trying, sometimes failing, but trying a new way to present a type of gameplay or a type of story or whatever. And as people started realizing what was maybe not necessarily right or correct, but certainly what was popular, and companies really honed in on that, a lot of that experimentation fell away. And that, I think, is objectively and demonstrably true. And so when, if younger listeners are wondering, like, was it really that much different? That stuff really has changed. And I think, like, certainly for myself, and I think for Wayne, when we say things like it was different back then, that's really why.
Yeah, and I think a part of it was also, like, that was in an era where something that I've always tried to touch on when discussing games is the concept of quality versus quantity, or the idea of, like, scope creep and the consequences of that. And I think especially with that era and with certain types of games, obviously, it was a huge market. Like, different games were being successful or failing in different unique ways all across the board. That's the case with every era of games. That's the case with stuff now. But a lot of games are smaller, but they were taking small concepts and exploding them to insane degrees. Another game that I fell in love with over the past couple of years. I keep discovering stuff from this era that I'm just like,
yeah,
I don't know even if I would have paid this much attention to it if I had played it when it came out. Like,
sure, yeah.
Yeah, I think a younger me would not have had the patience for certain things, or may not have been as impressed by certain things. But it's going back now, like, one of my obsessions over the past couple of years has been OutRun 2, or OutRun. Okay. OutRun 2006 Coast to Coast is one of the greatest games ever made. Like, I 100% believe that. I do not think that's being hyperbolic. I think it completely understands what it is, and I think it takes it to every extreme that it should, and it is a pure experience.
So 2006, was that Xbox or?
It was Xbox, PlayStation 2, and a surprisingly good port for the PSP.
Oh, interesting. Oh, dude, that's another, Saturn port, PSP port is also another phrase that makes my brain light up. I love that.
Dude, I threw the PSP version onto my Vita, and it's so good. OutRun 2006. It's worth noting that the Xbox and PS2 also had, OutRun 2, which I believe was in 2004, so that was like 2 years prior.
Okay.
2006 adds in a bunch of new content. There's new modes and stuff, new things to do, but it also adds in the arcade mode of OutRun 2 SP, and all of the content from that as a playable mode as well. And it just throws it all at you. It's just like, here's all of it, and it is.
So is it the feel of the vehicles? Like, is it what's the thing about it that really got you?
That's the interesting thing for me. So traditionally, especially growing up, I did not really care about racing games. I adored Crash Team Racing. That one was different.
Okay. Yeah.
I latched on to Crash Team Racing in a way that I never did with Mario Kart. It might have been just that was one of the first PlayStation games I ever owned. That was one of my first games was CTR. And so I played the heck out of it. That game was also my gateway into Spyro. I absolutely loved that. I liked a little bit of Sonic Riders. I played a Burnout one night and I had fun. But outside of that, not a lot of racing games. I remember a couple of years ago, I believe we were headed for TMG. A buddy of mine, Josh, or Executioner, on the socials. He had me over at his place because he was going to be driving us up to TMG the next day, and I noticed him playing a game called Slipstream. Okay. And it is synthwave personified as a game,
All right. That's like I can visualize it.
It's so good. I think like the max it ever costs is like $10, and it is on everything.
Oh, really? Okay.
And and I discovered like heavily inspired by OutRun. Of course, if you're familiar with OutRun, you look at it and you just know immediately. But it blends it blends the aesthetics and like some of the style of OutRun with a lot of visual elements of Sonic the Hedgehog from the Genesis era.
Oh, okay.
With music that sounds like it's out of like a RoboCop or something. Like it's so synthy. That's a bad comparison. But that era, like I don't know why RoboCop was the first thing that came to mind, but like it's 80s synth. Like it's so heavy, and but it also has so many well realized visual elements all of its own. I never want to just put something in the pocket of comparing it to something it was inspired by. Like it rises above being an imitator, and it is its own thing. But one of the great things that it introduced was the heavy emphasis on drifting that was lifted from OutRun 2.
Okay.
And it is like you're going to be drifting and using slipstreams to your advantage throughout that entire game. And the racing is so much fun. The tracks are so cool. The soundtrack is fantastic. I want a vinyl of that soundtrack, please. And that was what got me more interested in OutRun, which I was already familiar with, but I hadn't given a lot of time to. But Slipstream became one of my go-to like comfort games. That was something I could just throw on any time. Yeah, play for like 20 minutes and just be happy. Great for car trips and stuff like that. And then I started playing the OutRun games. And I really liked OutRun on the Genesis. I think the only inbox game that I have for the Master System is OutRun. And then I played OutRun 2. OutRun 2 was when they started leaning heavier into the drifting. It is a heightened realism as a game. And the thing that separates OutRun from a lot of racing games, I would even say from Slipstream, because Slipstream is more of a racer. The thing that separates OutRun is that it is not a game about racing. It's a game about driving. And it is... Okay. Yeah, it is how far can you get from like point A to point B. One of the coolest things that Slipstream kind of aped from this was the splitting level design, where you'll make it to the end of a track and you take one of two exits. You go left or right and it'll take you to a different track, and that bleeds into like another like area.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and you just keep going till you reach the end of that route. And Coast to Coast is just so gorgeously realized. Again, it feels so incredibly arcadey because it was an arcade game. And they added in this element, another video, highly recommend if you would like to know more about OutRun, especially if we're talking the original. If you're familiar with the YouTube channel Transparency.
I've never heard of it.
Well, they are great. They made a wonderful video about OutRun, and also how it relates to a certain tone and a certain like theme from a popular movie from a while back. I almost don't want to spoil what movie, because I feel like it was so fun to just kind of hear them name drop it and explain the connection. So I highly recommend the Transparency video on OutRun. And one of the cute little details that they had in the original was, you know, you're driving and you're just seeing how far you can go. You have a time limit to get to the end of whatever track you're on, and once you hit a checkpoint into the next track, it extends your time, but you do not get a time extension until you make it that far. You have to learn how to drift at the corners correctly, avoid traffic, and just not make mistakes on your way there so that you reach the end of time.
Awesome. I never knew that a racing game or driving game like that existed, because so much of what you hear is that it's an arcade racer, and I think of stuff like, you know, maybe like Wipeout or whatever, and then on the other end it's a simulation racer, and I think of like Formula One and Gran Turismo, but I didn't know that exists. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, and it's got like the tone with it too, because it's not even just about like, because you're passing other vehicles along the road and stuff like that, but the game starts with like one of the first things you do is you're just choosing the music on the radio, and
okay, cool.
Yeah, choosing music on the radio, at least in the original OutRun, that's how you start, and which I always thought was a cute detail, and also I love the music in the OutRun games. But you also have your date with you in the seat next to you in the car.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so you have this girl with you that's like, she's cheering you on or just like getting miffed with you if you're driving poorly, and in yeah, in OutRun 2, they drive that up a notch. And she will be like in the seat next to you, but she'll like also be like audibly like cheering you on and just being like, she'll let you know when she's like impressed with like how you're driving. It's such a stupid, simple little thing, but every time like you do something and she'll be like, "You're so cool," I just smile because I'm like, that's just so adorable. But she'll start throwing stuff at you in OutRun 2, where she's just like, now that it's still the same concept. You're running along these tracks under a time limit, and you're just trying to make it to the end. And you're also accounting for how much time you want to stack so that you can make it all the way to the end of this course, depending on the routes that you take. And now in each track, she's throwing little missions at you. Pass other cars. Don't crash. Like, pass this convoy that we're coming up across. Or hit the other cars on the road. Don't get captured by the UFOs flying overhead. Hit these ghosts. Yeah. Like, it gets like absurd.
Okay.
And
that
then
sounds awesome.
yeah, and you earn like little heart points with like how much your date is like connecting with you along the way. I didn't mean to talk that much about OutRun 2. I like that game a lot.
No, that's great. That game sounds so cool. I never knew anything like racing games are a huge blind spot for me. I listed a few of the only ones that I'd ever played, which are Wipeout, Mario Kart, and Gran Turismo.
Yeah.
A little bit of Burnout, but I never really got into the genre at all. So hearing about the variety, just that sort of difference between what I'm used to, that sounds so novel and cool. And people are probably like, yeah, there's a bunch of games that are like that. What are you talking about? But that sounds awesome. You've definitely sold me on it, and I'm going to check out that video that you mentioned as well, because I want to know more about it.
I'll link that to you, because I loved that video, and it does a great job just capturing what's special about OutRun. And it's the other little things. It's the music. It's the sounds that they use. It's the way that the environments look. It's the way the environment around you changes as you come from like one track into the next. And it's special. It's a special game. And I really, 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 really want to play on an actual OutRun 2 SP cabinet if I ever encounter one. Have not had that opportunity, but
is there like a known place or like a barcade or maybe somewhere in Japan where it's known to have the cabinet?
Ooh, I don't know. I'm gonna have to research that further. Because like
I will keep an eye out too, because I frequent a few barcades in Portland and sometimes Seattle areas, and if I ever see one, I'm going to snap a photo and I'm going to send it to you now.
Sweet. I would appreciate that.
I'll probably play it too, because this sounds awesome.
Well, I remember at MagFest one year, they had an arcade cabinet for OutRun 1, and I was ecstatic. So like, I got to play that, but like, I want to play OutRun 2 SP on an actual cabinet. I also want them to bring that into one of the Yakuza or Like a Dragon games, because I think Yakuza 0 has the arcade version of the original OutRun. I don't think they've done OutRun 2 yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There's something to what you were saying, over like your overall point about going back to a game that you wouldn't have necessarily been interested in you can't say for sure if you would have been interested in at the time of release. But then with hindsight, being really impressed by what it is and seeing the novelty that maybe still exists with, nothing else like that ever really existed, or seeing how it connects to games that you like now or liked later on, and how it was like, oh, they were already doing this way back then and I just didn't realize, or I didn't make the connection, or whatever. That is one of the best parts to me about going back and playing older games, because none of us played everything that came out when we were kids, and there's so much out there to experience that we missed out on, and seeing those connections it's so cool. It's so fun.
Yeah, it is. It's so much fun, like, going back to some of this stuff. It's been one of the most rewarding aspects of working, like, in a chain of used game stores, and being able to kind of see. I will see things just come in and then not know what it is, research it. That's how Digimon happened. I saw a copy of Digimon World 1 come in, and I was just like, I always saw this around as a kid. I never actually got a chance to play it. I don't know if I would actually like this, but here it is. Like, I finally get a chance to actually try this, and now look where we are.
I get that. That was me in Vagrant Story about 10 years ago. I'd always seen it in like the electronics section at a store or a games. I work for GameSpot, and GameStop is the name of the store. The game stops, and never played it. And then I got it. I put it on my Vita, and totally fell in love with it. Because like I said, I never had a PlayStation, and those. Being able to fulfill those kind of like those childhood dreams, like I always saw this game in the store and I never really got to play it. Now I got my hands on it. Man, it's so surprising too when you do that, and it is something like your experience with OutRun or my experience with Vagrant Story, where it totally still holds up or even surpasses stuff nowadays in a way that you just were not expecting.
Yeah, and that's the joy of it, right? That's the fun of the game industry, is just like seeing what was always hiding in plain sight. That's why I always it always rubs me the wrong way a little bit when I do hear people say it's just like, oh well, games used to be so much better, like they just don't do them the same way anymore, and I'm just like, you just gotta keep looking. Like, there's some amazing new things, like, coming out today. Slipstream is a great example, heavily inspired by other things, yes, but a wonderful game in its own right, and one that I still go to for something very special to itself outside of its roots. Same thing for, like, Bomb Rush Cyberpunk. Man, that game is everything I could have wanted it to be.
Yeah, you were really hyping that up. I still haven't played it, because that is... I have some familiarity. I played a little bit of the Jet Set games. I love the aesthetic, but I never really played them. But hearing you go all in for Bomb Rush really put it on. It interested me. I still haven't played it though.
It's I think it's a fantastic game. There are a couple of things that I think might be a little off-putting depending on the person. I know one thing that I love about it is that it's a Dreamcast game. Like, it looks like a Dreamcast game.
Okay.
It is that fidelity of models, and that's the way that they move. That's the way that the models clip in on themselves and stuff, which I personally love.
I'm all for it. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that the music is a little contentious in the first major area that you visit. All of my least favorite songs are there. But then, like, the soundtrack just picks way up, and I still wouldn't change it. Especially when you come to an understanding, because I remember listening to an interview where they were talking about, like, hey, here's all of these different sections, here's all of these different, like, gangs that you run into, and they are all inspired by a different genre of music and dance. And yeah, and so, like, the music tracks that they chose for that are all, like, independently made. They're, like, taken and licensed from independent artists and compiled into this soundtrack. And they they developed the dances that the characters would do around that, and also like the attitudes of the people there. And so it's just like, yeah, the music in that first opening area is a little off-putting to a lot of people, and myself included. Again, they're not my favorite tracks. I still wouldn't change them. That, and the director was literally just like, if you get the PC version, you can literally just mod in whatever music you want. So.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. So it's like. And yeah, I would just say like that's a great game to stick with. The only other thing for that one is that like it might ruin the other Jet Set Radio games for you, especially especially the original, because
that's the one I've played the most of. I think I've played like 2 or 3 hours of that game.
Okay, I love both of them, and I hope we get Jet Set Radio back, and I hope Future finally gets like some form of re-release. That poor thing has been stuck on the OG Xbox for a really long time.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, I know that people love the first one, but I feel like at least maybe it's just because a lot of our peers are of similar ages, but that's the one that I hear more people asking for.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I think I prefer the original Jet Set Radio. I do think Future is a better game.
Yeah, that makes sense. I get that.
It definitely controls better. Like, the original Jet Set Radio does not control great. I'm used to it, so, like, I can play that game no problem, but...
That makes sense. Okay. I need to go check something really quick.
Yeah, no
outside. I'll be like a minute. Just 1 second.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay, we're good. It was, there was a dog outside that looked a lot like my dog, just running around off leash, and I just needed to make sure that somehow my dog didn't escape. He did not.
That's perfectly fine. Yeah, no worries, man. That's the beauty of doing these pre-recorded. I could just cut that part out.
Yeah, exactly, right? Okay.
I was gonna.
That was a good break in the conversation too. So there.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, like, we're talking about all of these great games and everything that like we've kind of returned to later on, and things that we've started to appreciate in retrospect. Well, one genre that I have personally not had a whole lot of experience with, but I've always been curious about.
Yes.
I cannot wait to tell you my first experience with a game in this genre, because it's really funny. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about a genre that I know you care a lot about.
Yes.
So, what can you tell me about dungeon crawlers?
Well, how much time you got, Wayne? So, it's funny because there's so much synergy to what you were just talking about with OutRun. And really some of the stuff that you were talking about with like Skies of Arcadia and some of that other stuff, and just talking about going back to Saturn games, or me discovering PS1 and Saturn games. Basically, the shortest possible explanation for how I got into dungeon crawlers was around 2011, and I was in college at the time, and Skyrim and Dark Souls came out within a month of each other. And this was a big deal because those two games got me back into video games in a way that I hadn't really been in for a few years at the time. Basically, I really only played stuff like Metroid Prime when those came out, and some other games here and there. And I never really like fully got out of it or anything. It wasn't like I wasn't playing any video games, but it was by far one of the least amount of games I had played. Like that time I was following games the least. I was really into like metal music and hardcore punk and stuff, and so I was spending a lot of time in those scenes. And but then Skyrim, Dark Souls came out, really got me back into it, and I had some familiarity with Demon Souls, and those two games made me want to just go all in on RPGs again, and specifically like really difficult stuff like Dark Souls. And so I started looking around for games that were like it, and of course at the time it really was just Demon Souls and Dark Souls. But then I discovered that there was this genre of game called dungeon RPGs, which we don't really call them that here as much as more of a Japanese term for the style of game. I use it all the time. But what got me interested is that I saw a review for a game called The Dark Spire on the Nintendo DS. And this is an old school, really difficult wizardry style. It basically is just a full-on wizardry ripoff made by Atlas. And I checked it out, and it was hard. And because everyone was like, it's like Dark Souls, but on the DS. And it's not really. I mean, it is in its difficulty and some of its art direction and whatnot, but it's not like... It's a turn-based wizardry style RPG, and that got me into Etrian Odyssey, and from there I just really fell in love with that genre, and I played Legend of Grimrock shortly after that, and it was just like the best possible time for me to get into these games, and everything just sort of clicked. And yeah, ever since then, I have really liked them, but it wasn't until a few years later, when I had left college, I was craving a game that was like Metroid Prime. I was desperate to play more games like Metroid Prime because to me, they're still so singular. You know, the first-person Metroidvanias are very hard to come by. They certainly were hard to come by back then. And I heard everyone would bring up stuff like the original System Shock. And so I tried that out and I liked it, but I could never really get through the control scheme of it. The remake that came out recently is phenomenal, and anyone who has ever been curious about those games should go check out System Shock. It is kind of a Metroidvania-ish, but you know, it's also closer to something like Thief or BioShock, even to a certain extent. But the full circle on all this was on a whim, I played two games. I played Mega Man Legends for the first time, and I played the PS1 Kingsfield games, which are made by From Software. It was their first, the first games they ever made were the Kingsfield games. And I realized that to a certain extent, some of what I was looking for was in Mega Man Legends, but even more of it was in Kingsfield. These games are just like they're dungeon crawlers, but they're Metroidvania dungeon crawlers. Especially like Kingsfield 4 might as well just be a Metroidvania game. And I fell in love with them so much, and that really was where I was like, okay, this is like everything I was looking for. They're difficult RPGs like I wanted when I was at the time. And they're like Metroidvania games, and basically that was it. That was what sold me. That was what really made me from like a general fan to just a hardcore dungeon crawler sicko. So, and ever since then, like I just can't get enough of them.
Yeah, it's I've always been fascinated by like the very classic style, like first-person dungeon crawling. Like, yeah, there are a couple of games that sort of come to mind when I think of that particular genre. It's kind of like you were saying, I think it's kind of broad, like how much you can really attribute like dungeon crawler or dungeon RPG to. Yeah,
like there's dungeon crawling the genre, and there's dungeon crawling the activity. Like if someone came up to me and said, hey, my favorite dungeon crawler is Ocarina of Time, I wouldn't necessarily say they're wrong, because it's a dungeon crawling action adventure. Like the whole point of those games is the dungeons, Yeah. You can say that about pretty much all of the Zelda games. But if someone were to ask me like, what is a good dungeon crawler to start with, I wouldn't necessarily say the Ocarina of Time. So it is weird because you can, and we have stuff like Diablo and I do consider stuff like Dark Souls and even Elden Ring to be in the dungeon crawler realm. Yeah. But yeah, like when we're talking about like dungeon crawlers, for me, it's that first person, that first person, often grid based, often party based style of RPG.
Yeah, I think actually one of the first games that I played that got me kind of thinking about the term was Skyrim.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, because that was my favorite thing to do in that game. Was like I want to go underground. I want to like run around in these like dark stone tunnels and like fight skeletons. Like that's fun. I especially want to do it again now that I've got like the VR version, which adds a whole different level to that game. The first kind of talking again about like the classic first person like 2D graphics. You're kind of just scrolling through blindly.
Sure. Yeah.
I think a good comparison would be like kind of how they handle it in the original like SMT Persona games.
Yes. Oh, yeah. SMT, like they were doing wizardry, but putting it in like that like what would you call it? Like occult, like techno occult.
Yeah,
vibe.
it was modern cultic horror, like essentially.
Yeah.
But the first game that I ever played with that kind of gameplay. So when I was a kid, I for Christmas one year, I got a thing. Do you remember those old plug and plays?
Yeah. Like we would have like a joystick, and it would be like, here's Pac-Man and 100 other games.
Yeah. So I had a Spider-Man one, and there was it had like 6 mini games in it, and like they were just simple format little games. I think one was actually straight up like inspired by the Atari 2600 Spider-Man game, but like there was one that is a first-person dungeon crawler where you're in the sewers trying to find it and beat the lizard.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
I gotta see if I can find this somewhere, because like that was my introduction to like the concept. And so anytime I see like Persona or Etrian Odyssey or Wizardry, I think of that stupid Spider-Man plug and play.
It's amazing how many games use that sort of perspective and control scheme and movement style, even if they weren't necessarily like, it's in Goemon. Goemon has basically first-person dungeon crawling sections. Again, I wouldn't necessarily say that they are dungeon crawlers, even with that, that presentation. But it's still there, and that was one of the things that going back to playing a lot of these games, and then like I said, going back to like Kingsfield and whatnot, it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier with playing older games and realizing that this thing that I like about Metroid Prime or Dark Souls or even Skyrim, these ideas that I ascribe to these newer games, they were doing it in the 80s, man. They were doing it in the 90s for sure. These older titles out there were already trying that, and it looks higher fidelity graphics and slightly different control schemes or gameplay styles or whatever. The design is still there, and that is what I find so exciting and compelling about it. Because another reason that I went looking for all these games is, especially looking for stuff that's like Metroid Prime, is because that was really where I started toying with the idea of making my own game. And I always wanted to make something that was like Metroid Prime because there was not much else out there that I was aware of. And then, I was exploring other games that were similar to that. And then, come to find out that, actually, there is some of this in something like Etrian Odyssey or Wizardry or whatever. And maybe I didn't necessarily need to be making Metroid Prime. Maybe I could be making Wizardry, was basically the conclusion that I came to with that. And that helped also, really drive my interest in exploring as much of the genre as possible to see what was out there, what people had done, find ideas to pull from, that sort of thing.
Yeah. That's like the game that I've wanted to make is heavily inspired by a lot of the games like I loved the most growing up. I want to say it's very like early 3D Zelda inspired is like the main game that I want to work on, but a little less tanky and a little heavier emphasis on the action, if that makes any sense.
Have you played, there's a game that came out, there's a couple games that came out recently. There's one that's coming out soon that also reminds me of, and I cannot remember. I think it's called like something Abyss, and I don't remember.
It wasn't Tales of the Abyss, was it?
No, it's an indie game made by the people who made Unsighted.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure.
They're
I'm familiar.
making. So they're. I'll link it to you after when I can remember the name of it. But another one is called Altis. I've seen a lot of people have recommended it to me. It's a slightly higher fidelity, but still that general generation of low poly, and it's like a dungeon crawling action adventure game. You kind of create your own character. They make it seem like it's like an online MMO. I don't know if there is actually online elements to it, but it looks like something like a Zelda or even like a Phantasy Star Online, but with more of a fantasy vibe. And it's got really fluid action. That might be something to check out.
Yeah, and I would honestly love to tell you more about like my own like concept, but because it is an idea that I do actively want to do something with, like I have essentially a pitch, but I don't want to give too many details away on
Sure.
like what could become an actual project.
Oh man, I would love to hear. That is one of my favorite things to talk about. You know the YouTuber Arlo?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so he and I are constantly going back and forth talking about game design ideas. Like whenever we meet up at conventions or just, in our personal time, that's like the thing we talk about. And he's like, that is my favorite thing to talk about with people. And it's so fun when someone expresses interest in it. So I definitely want to hear your ideas.
Oh yeah, I would love to like throw them by you. I just not in front of an audience, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh no,
Yeah.
Totally. Like that's something that I learned this early on in my YouTube, I guess, or just online content creation in general. Not to really talk about what I was working on unless it was something that was actively being worked on and about to come out.
And
for
copyrighted.
2 reasons. Yes. There's two reasons for that. The first is that there's always unforeseen circumstances. Things can fall through. You never know what you're actually going to be able to accomplish. So announcing a thing when you've just decided to start working on it, maybe not the best idea because you might not finish it. And then the other reason is someone out there might take that idea and do something with it. Maybe it's not exactly what you were thinking, but it's very obviously like, oh, yeah, I probably shouldn't have told you that I was working on that because you just went and did that too.
Yeah.
Okay. And it happens. It's okay. Sometimes parallel thought happens, but other times it's just like, oh, okay. They just kind of they scooped my idea out from under me. So I get it.
Yeah. It is like kind of the hard part, especially when you get so excited about just talking about all these cool things. And this is a concept that I drafted up in college, and
oh man, okay, yeah.
like it was like I was just sketching before a class started, and I just kept like the sketch wasn't coming together correctly, but like I kept making alterations to it, and then it just became a thing. And I've been wanting to make this a full game for a very long time, and I have a pretty clear vision of where I want it to go.
Okay, that's so exciting because I think for so many people, they get excited about the idea of a game in their head, or they think, oh, it would be cool if a game that was like, I don't know, it was like this game plus this game, and they think about it and they go, I'm going to make it, but they don't do the initial step, which is what you did of like creating basically a design document and drafting up what it could be and trying to create a roadmap of what you want to make. Like that's such an important step. So it's cool that you did that. And it's my feeling on like game dev stuff. I've made I made a tabletop game, and I've made a very tiny little wizardry inspired dungeon crawler. And both of those were really fun and fulfilling projects, but they were both stepping stones towards the game that I've had in my mind since, like for years. I think for me, it's been like 6 years I've been thinking about this. So,
Yeah. it's I do want to. I think part of what helped, especially at the time, was I was taking like a game design course while I was in college.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. So I was like, so, you know, I already had like kind of an okay idea of like how to go about, you know, actually starting to put together a pitch Bible and how to like start documenting this stuff properly. And I had the help of yeah. And I had the help of some trusted friends to try to like actually get some of these ideas into a much more clear state. I do want to see if I can find, because I'm sure she would be okay with me at least showing you this. Yeah, that's maybe for after the discussion. But I get excited about this concept again. But yeah, I think that's kind of the path forward, is just, and that's why I do YouTube stuff now. It's not why I started, but now that I'm further into it, it's just like, how can I take what I've learned from the games that I've liked or the games that I haven't? How can I adapt that into creating a new experience? Like, can this be more than just making silly little videos? And can this be about something substantial, about like work, not only like speaking about all of these ideas, not just writing them down, not just cracking jokes about them, but adapting what I've learned from the work of other talented people, from, you know, the good and the bad. You know, that's the community aspect. That's you know what it should be like, is we're all just learning from each other.
Yeah, I think that I have found that a lot of the people who I talk to, who have become friends with in the content creation and, you know, games media space, is there's like 2 or 3 types of people, and the people that I tend to really like gel with the most are folks like you and I, where it's like the idea of this is a, you know, I'm looking at this from the design perspective, because at a certain point in time, I want to implement it. I want to try it myself. I want to see, you know, how can I take these ideas or these lessons or even just like the pure inspiration of thinking a thing looks cool and do something too. And like there's other folks out there who, you know, like for them it's really purely about, you know, the criticism, the, you know, like expressing their feelings on the game, and I have nothing against that. I love that kind of content. I watch that kind of content. But it's when it comes to what I want to talk about with games, what I'm interested in about games, it really comes down to the design aspect, the creation aspect of it. And that's why, you know, for the last year or so, a lot of the videos that I really focused on, you know, I've only done a few of them, but it was developer interviews and to get more of that insight into how things are made, because ultimately, you know, that's the goal, is to make more of this.
Yeah. Well, I think we've been at this for a good like hour and a half now. I think that's actually a pretty healthy little place to kind of cap the discussion. Really, is we can put out that, you know, cool stuff is on the way, and, you know, who knows when or where people will see the fruits of these discussions and these ideas. But it's a nice it's a hopeful note to end on for sure. Yeah, and that's and of course, like that's also just kind of a call to action for anybody listening. Is just don't. You know, it's like, it's great to have the ideas. Don't just sit on them. Like, you know, do something with them. Like, at the very least, get it out on paper. Write it out. Like, you know, that's always that first step towards, you know, moving past it being a concept and turning it into something. Yeah, and one of the things that I have learned, there's 2 big lessons that I have learned that I would add on top of that. And that is, the idea should not be what the end goal should be. The idea should be the thing that's inspiring you to see what this thing will ultimately become. And that's kind of hard to know what that feels like until you've started to do it. I struggled with it a lot when I started making stuff, but the process is where it comes through. It's not just thinking about it. You know, like Wayne said, you don't want to sit on it. You want to put it out there, and then that's where it starts to really take on its own life and its own direction, and that's where the process takes you.
if it doesn't match up exactly with what's in your mind, don't get discouraged. There are so many different ways to make a thing and to make a thing come to fruition, that you should be focusing on making it and not making it perfect or exactly like you imagine it. And the other thing is, Wayne and I kind of talked about this off. I'm now like directly talking to the listener, but Wayne and I talked about this off the air just before we started. But something that I've been doing is taking 10 minutes per day to just work on creative projects, personal projects outside of my normal work. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but at the end of a week, you have almost an hour's worth of work. And sometimes, that can add up really quickly. And, oftentimes I go beyond the 10 minutes, but just knowing that every day I have at least 10 minutes to work on something, and that at the end of it, I'll have a few paragraphs of a script or, part of a sketch done or something, that really feels good. And that momentum builds up over time so much. So those would be the two things, like those two. One is more of a conceptual thing and one is more of a a practical thing. But those would be the two lessons I would leave people on if they're at all interested in game development or just making stuff in general.
Yeah. And I guess on that note, is there anything that you are currently working on that you'd like to share now?
Yeah, so I will hopefully within the next few weeks have kind of last year I did a big roundup of 2023's dungeon crawlers and RPGs and dungeon crawling adjacent games, and just games I liked. A similar video is coming out this year. It's not going to be quite as big just because I didn't have as much time to play a bunch of stuff this year. And so it'll be a little bit smaller and a little bit different in scope, but that's coming out soon. And a lot of these game development ideas that we've been batting around, that's going to be way more of a focus in 2025 on the channel and just in my personal life in general. So if you want to follow that, check out youtube.com/thecrawl. I'm also on social media. Just if you look Brendan_LH or Brendan LH, I'm on pretty much all the major ones on Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram. Yeah.
Well, cool. And y'all know where I'm at. You guys are stuck with me. This will of course be up early for Patreon supporters. Doesn't matter what tier. If you're paying for Patreon, you get this a week earlier than everyone else, and then it'll be up on the YouTubes. I've had a couple of people ask me if they want. If there'd be the possibility of this podcast kind of getting put onto other audio platforms. I'm not sure yet. I think it kind of depends. Let's give it a couple more episodes and just kind of see how the reception is and if people are really enjoying this and would like to hear more. I do really want to thank Brendan for joining me here today to help discuss
Thank you for having me on, man. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, it's the kind of discussion that I wanted this show for. Just being able to talk about it doesn't even have to be about one specific thing. It's just what do we appreciate about the game industry? What does it mean to us? And what do we want to do with it going forward?
Yeah.
With all of that said, thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you next mission.